All right, welcome back to the No Money Real Estate Podcast. It's Ken here, and today I've dragged my personal appraiser into the studio. We're going to talk about all things appraisal today. And friends, if you're real estate investors and you're following me on this show, then you have to understand, I think one of the biggest mistakes real estate investors make is they don't understand how to use appraisers properly. Appraisers can stop you from making a boatload of mistakes, and we're going to get into it right after this. Hey, my name's Ken Dunn, and I'm a real estate investor. I want to welcome you to the No Money Real Estate Podcast. On this show, I'm going to interview elite level real estate investors from all over North America, and I'm going to help you to see one thing that all successful real estate investors have in common. They built their portfolios without using a dime of their own money. I've got a portfolio of $300 million in real estate. That includes resorts, apartment buildings, commercial buildings, and I built the entire portfolio without using a dime of my own money. Real estate is a business that anybody can get into, but the strategies that those titan real estate investors use to build massive portfolios have been kept secret for decades. Now, because of this show, I'm going to reveal them to you. So let's get started. All right, welcome back, everybody. Eddie, great to be with you, man. I'm super excited that you're in the studio with me today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. We've done a bunch of deals together. You've always been bang on in everything we do together, but I think a lot of real estate investors don't understand the full potential that a good appraiser can be for you in a project. So what I'd like you to do is just to start off by talking a little bit about you, about appraisals in general, accreditation. So you said something to me before we came on camera. You said becoming an accredited appraiser is pretty well the same as becoming a lawyer.
I would say the level of education, to be more precise, that is required to become an AACI appraiser, which is the designation that allows you to do both residential and commercial. The amount of investment that is required in time is comparable to becoming a lawyer. You need to get your degree from a university, or you need to get all those credits, let's say with the Appraisal Institute or whatever other institution you're with. And then after that, you need to go for completing another 7 credits, plus you need to do professional standard seminars and so on. And so it takes about 4 to 6 years additional after getting a business degree, let's say, if you went for that, which would be the most relatable to the appraisal designation.
Even the way you answered that question sounds like a lawyer.
There we go. Yeah. Okay.
How long have you been doing this for, man? And how did you get into appraisals in the first place?
So altogether, I've been in the industry maybe about 15 years related to appraisals. I got into this because as a kid, I was trying to figure out what to do. And then I realized, okay, I want to go into business and I want to be an entrepreneur. And then I started studying real estate at 15 or 16 with the Rich Dad, Poor Dad books.
Yep.
And that got me fired up.
Yep.
But I didn't feel prepared. So I decided to go to university and get an entrepreneurship and finance degree. And then at the end of my degree, I said, what do I want to do? Well, I want to go into real estate. And that's why I chose this path. So then I used my finance knowledge and I said, okay, the value of any asset is the present value of the future cash flows. And then I asked my finance professor, who understands the cash flow of real estate properties better than anybody. She said, well, appraisers are the professionals, designated professionals and experts on that field. So I said, okay, I'll become an appraiser. So then I took the very long route to become an investor. And then I started in the real estate appraisal field. As a kid, not knowing anything, trying to figure it out. And eventually I started getting more and more committed, more into it, and fully dedicated to it. And then I got the opportunity to start a firm, and I did it.
And what's the name of your firm?
It's called Community Appraisals Ltd.
And where do you guys actually do appraisals? Where can you help people? Because we have people right across Canada listening to this podcast.
Gotcha, yeah. Well, our main area of coverage is Southern Ontario. This is our primary area.
Okay.
The appraisal designation does not limit you to work in any particular area. But this is our main area of operation. We can do appraisal assignments outside. And as a matter of fact, we've done appraisals on the West Coast. We've done appraisals on the East Coast. We've even done collaborations in a consulting capacity in appraisal projects in the U.S. as well.
So we're going to unpack appraisals in this episode, but just so everybody knows, because we're going to put your contact information in the notes for the show, and I hope a whole bunch of people call you guys to get your help because you've been a blessing to me. But as an appraiser, it's not just going in and looking at the value of a house somebody's buying. There's lots of things you guys do when it comes to, your as complete appraisals, even commercial appraisals, and you look at the finances of businesses that are operated around real estate. Kind of give me an overview of the multitude of things that you do as an appraiser.
There's a lot of different types of services that can apply to any particular sort of situation that you're in. An appraisal might even not be the most appropriate service depending on what you need. So when you come in and let's say you're gonna ask for an appraisal, the first thing we do is we ask you to fill out our online request form. So on our website, we have a link, as you well know, where you give us all the details. And in this form, we ask all the basic information that we need to determine what kind of service you actually need. So we ask you things like, what is the intended use, which is now, according to CUSPAP 2024, it'll be referred to, we're in the process of transitioning, it'll be referred to as authorized use. We ask you who's gonna be the authorized client or intended client. And then we ask you what type of property we're dealing with, and what's the purpose of the appraisal. So is it to establish the current as-is market value of the property, what most people refer to as the value of your property?
Yep.
Or the current as-complete value of the property, which in the investment space, you oftentimes refer to it, as you mentioned earlier, ARV, after repair value. In the appraisal side, we refer to it as complete. These are the two most common types of services, but there's a lot of other than. We can appraise a property retrospectively, for instance, for capital gains. We'll appraise the property as of a retrospective date, so it's not current, or rather retrospective, and then it could be as is. But it could be hypothetical appraisal. So an as complete appraisal is a hypothetical appraisal, meaning the improvements that we're describing are not actually there. They're not existent. Either they're going to be completed, or you just want to know, what if I did this type of property here?
Yep.
They're more risky types of appraisals, especially we're talking about lending or different kinds of uses that are going to affect some third parties. You could talk about appraisal in terms of it being a process in which we first discover. We have discovery phase, where first we understand the scope of the assignment, what's involved, what is the subject property, what is the intended use, and what is the most appropriate type of service to deliver. And then we bring it down all the way down to discovering the subject site, the subject property, the neighborhood, the area, the industries, the economy, and the market as a whole. Then we move into approach highest and best use, which would be the maximally productive use of any particular property as improved and as vacant. After that, then we are in a position to say, okay, the best valuation approach that we can take with this property is a direct comparison approach, an income approach, a cost approach, or some other
and these approaches are all different types of appraisals. These are the different products or the different ways to do an appraisal that'll affect what you charge clients.
There are more components of an appraisal.
Right.
So,
but what I mean is there's going to be an appraisal that you're going to do that you don't need to do some type of financial cost estimates. Like if it's a simple place where people are buying houses. And so if you're not including that in it, the cost of the appraisal is going to be less because there's less work to do on it.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. So this is why we ask those questions at the beginning of the appraisal process, and why that discovery initial process is so important. It's because depending on that, we can start fine-tuning the type of work and the scope of the assignment. And on the basis of the scope, generally, if it's a fair appraisal company, they'll charge you more or less depending on the work that's involved.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so in real estate investing, I think one of the reasons that I've been able to be so successful is I understand how valuable a good appraiser is in the process, because there's speculation in real estate investing, right? Like when people are going out and they're looking at a property to buy, there's going to be an element of speculation in that decision to buy that property, where they're looking at it, their own experiences are going to come into account. They might have a real estate agent in their ear that's saying, hey, there's 3 other properties around here that are worth this already. But if you let that speculation take you too far, it's going to lead to a failure. It's going to lead to a mistake. I know you were hanging out last weekend with a bunch of people I know at the multifamily conference. But when you're walking around talking to people at those conferences, if they're being open, you hear horrible stories about people bought properties and they thought it was worth this and it ended up being worth something else. And they go in and they're already underwater the day they own the property. And then they try to do renovations and they've got some contractor that says, oh, we can renovate it and do this, and they get an agent that is trying to sell them the property that gives them a comparable that says it's going to work, and it all ends up being smoke and mirrors. And I've seen people go bankrupt over doing this. Or luckily for me, have never ever experienced any of that negativity, and it's simply because every property I buy, I don't care what I'm buying, I always have a condition to do appraisals in there. In fact, I can go into a property and I can use some techniques that I've learned over the years to make sure it's a decent house. So if I go in the basement and I don't see any water damage, I can be pretty sure that there's no flooding issue. My favorite little techniques when I'm looking at cottages, I'll just take some marbles with me. Just drop them on the floor. If they stay still, it means it's generally level. What I learned years ago is that I'm going to get an appraisal condition in every deal, and I'm going to bring in somebody as competent as you are, and I'm going to say, I want you to do 2 appraisals for me. I'm going to give you all the details of what we're buying and you're going to come in and you're going to tell me, is it worth what I'm paying? And then I'm going to give you a detailed plan of the renovations we're going to do, and you're going to tell me what it's worth when it's finished. And you know what was really freaking weird about this is when I started teaching real estate investing, and I started explaining to people that every appraisal I do a double-ended, I call them double-ended appraisals, which is a Kenism, but I get both appraisals done, and I'll pay the appraiser whatever they want to do it, because it helps me mitigate the risk. If you tell me that it is worth this, and maybe like there's been situations where I've bought a place privately and paid $400,000 for it, and you come back and say it's worth $450. There's valid reasons for all that stuff. But the other side of the coin is, I tell people the most important word in real estate investing is the word lift. And lift means the difference between what you paid and what the money you put into it and what it's worth afterwards. So if that's the most important word, then that after complete appraisal, or I call it an ARV appraisal, after repair value appraisal, that's got to be the most important part of this whole process. What thoughts come to your mind hearing me say that, how important appraisals are to me? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Is my thinking off on this? Like, what's your feedback on that generally?
I appreciate that. Actually, I hear you say that, and it's motivating and uplifting for me. It tells me you value our profession, which is great. In fact, yes, this is exactly what part of our use is supposed to be as a real estate appraisers. And so this is one of the typical ways in which appraisers are put to use. The smart thing I think you're doing, and part of what I hear is like you're a very intelligent person, and you're looking to leverage expertise, and you're actually, what you're doing effectively is you're using an appraisal and you're leveraging it in multiple ways. One is to inform yourself, but also you're using it oftentimes is for financing purposes that you're ordering the appraisal. So you're actually using it for two purposes.
Yeah, validating the deal.
Which is intelligent.
Yeah.
It's an intelligent way to do it versus the other scenarios that you mentioned are kind of worst case.
But here's the thing. When I tell people about this, the fact that I can send an appraiser, and I'm paying more to do it if I'm getting them to do the as complete appraisal after the renovations as well as that first appraisal, I bet you 95% of the people I tell this to, they look at me like I have four heads. And I end up, a lot of times, it's almost like this conversation I have rehearsed when I talk to new people. I stop and I say, what's wrong? And they, you know what they say to me? They say, you can actually get an appraiser to tell you what it's worth after you finish the renovations. Like, people don't know this for some reason, like average real estate investors. They know it, but I don't think they understand the application of it, because I say, have you ever heard of somebody building their own house? And they say yes. And I say, well, how do you think they get the money? Well, they go to the bank. I said, yeah, what do you think the bank does? So bank's not just going to give the money. If you go to the bank with plans and say, hey, I want to build this house, I need funding to do it, you're going to give them plans. They're going to be architectural drawings. Guess what they do with that stuff? They give it to an appraiser, and the appraiser completes an appraisal based on the plans of what they're doing. I said, all I'm doing is taking that same ideal that they do these as complete appraisals and applying it to renovations, which is something they do all the time. How much of your work do you think is these as complete appraisals that you're doing for banks and real estate investors? And do you think there are opportunities where you should be doing it? So you're going out and doing an appraisal for people for real estate purposes, but they're not asking for these as complete appraisals or telling you about renovations.
Again, great points you're making. Generally speaking, what I find is most people, when they're ordering an appraisal, they come in asking for an appraisal because for financing purposes, most of the type of appraisals we do, they're asking for the appraisal that their mortgage broker or which the lender is requiring, and then the mortgage broker would generally be the one to put in the request and indicate what's needed. Generally speaking, so just because of that separation, oftentimes the property owner, the borrower, is not driving the appraisal process. So that's one of the reasons why oftentimes perhaps that opportunity is missed.
Good point.
But in the events where the borrower, him or herself, are putting in the request, I think oftentimes they're just looking to get the minimal thing that is needed. They're not thinking ahead, how might this benefit me, or how can I get informed? They're not considering all these factors that you're pointing to, and oftentimes don't have that experience that you have. But yeah, I think that's the reason why it gets missed. Mostly it's about thinking more short term and not kind of thinking strategically.
Well, the part you just said that was an aha for me is you're right. Most real estate investors don't even use appraisers properly because they're so worried about getting the money for the deal. They go to a mortgage broker and they're giving all the information to the mortgage broker and then just praying that they can get financing for it, rather than taking control of the deal and getting the appraisers up front. In fact, I told you about this before we got on camera. I recently had a property I bought, 1515 Dufferin Street. It was a fourplex. You came in, you did the as-is appraisal for me, and you did the as-complete appraisal. You gave me all the information I needed to make an informed decision. But then when we got the mortgage broker involved to arrange the the financing for the property, she went to a lender who needed another appraisal. And I guess there's a list that you have to be on with each of these brokers. But when we went to this other appraisal, they got the other appraisal done. The other appraiser asked if we'd already done an appraisal. So they got copies of your reports. And wouldn't you know it, their value on the property came back exactly like your value was. But I think that like a big problem with this that you just enlightened me to is most real estate investors or people trying to do this don't understand that they need to be in control of their projects, that they should have their own appraisals done. This is extra money I'm paying to you to do this stuff, but it saves me a lot of headaches later. It proves this point to me. So let's step back a bit and talk about appraisals. So there are two types of appraisals I really want to focus on here. Is that appraisal that you're doing around the purchase of a property to get the as-is value, the value it is now. And then afterwards, let's talk about these as complete values. Walk me through like the process of doing an appraisal. What you've already talked a little bit about what you do before it, but when you're actually on site, when you're looking at the property, when you're preparing that report, what kind of process is involved in getting all the data you need to prepare a report?
Once we actually get the request, we conduct an initial investigation of the subject property, right? We have to do a discovery of the subject. We interview the client as well. We get more information. So at this point, we're trying to get to what type of property we're dealing with, what is the highest and best use essentially, right? What's currently, how is the property currently used, but how is it being zoned? But before we get to zoning, the permissible uses and that sort of thing, we conduct an inspection of the property. And during this inspection, it's a walkthrough inspection, really. At some point, we even try to distance ourselves from inspection because we don't want to have it misconstrued with the type of inspection that an inspector does. A full inspection, right? Which is usually 4 to 5 hour thing for a single family dwelling. It's important to note that we are not designated inspectors, and so we're not certifying the condition of the property. And at the same time, we do look at the property keenly. We don't do testing, but we are looking visually to see whether we see any obvious damage. For the most part, in the appraisal reports, we indicate, hey, based on our visual estimation, there's nothing wrong with this property. However, we're not experts. If you do have concerns, you should consult an inspector, right? Every wise appraiser will do that because, again, that's not what our designation is about.
Right.
If, however, it is brought to our attention, either through inspection reports that are provided to us, or during inspection we see some sort of issue, then we do have the obligation to disclose it in the report. And then at the same time, we would then probably either invoke a hypothetical condition, indicate that appraising the property as if that wasn't a problem, and we're assuming it, and the reader is made aware that, hey, okay, we are not to be held responsible if the value does differ. But assuming that it moves forward smoothly, there's no issues. From that point forward, we then move into a neighborhood analysis, a site analysis. So we look at zoning, permissible uses, is the property's current use legally permissible, or is it illegal non-conforming, etc., so that we can establish highest and best use. Once we've established a highest and best use, we then move into determining what are the different approaches to value that we can take. And then basically what we do is we run multiple valuation models, different models, completely their own thing. Then we reconcile it. So the idea is we're going to take multiple approaches to look at the same problem of what is this property's current as its market value, assuming that that's what we're assessing. We're going to take different approaches to it. So one approach is going to be on the premise that if similar properties to this have sold within recently, and there were arm's length transactions that receive fair market exposure and whatnot, and they're similar to the subject property, and we adjust for the differences between it. Overall, a fair comparable selection should lead us to reasonable indication of market value. That's a direct comparison approach, and is the leading valuation approach that gets used. Most people think that's the only approach that you take to value, but that is the main one, but not always. It sounds
like there's a bit of a scientific process involved in this. So you're going to go out and do this direct comparison approach, but then you've got to validate that through other investigation, right?
Correct. So basically, ideally, we never take just one approach to value. The direct comparison approach is one of multiple different options to value a property that they are, and which options we pick is actually a step before even undertaking the valuation approach. And that process is called the approach to appraisal problem. We determine which evaluation approaches will be applying to this problem as soon as we have clear what is the highest and best use of the property, and also what is the buyer profile.
But I think the point I'm trying to pull out of you here is that when you're providing an appraisal report to somebody, it's not just simply a direct comparison report on paper.
Correct.
There's other things that are in that report, other investigation that you've done to confirm that value is accurate.
Correct. Aside from the direct comparison approach, well, again, all that research that I mentioned, researching the neighborhood and researching the site, knowing your areas, establishing geographical competencies, what is called the technical term, is extremely important. On this basis, we decide to do neighborhood adjustments, time adjustments, site area adjustments. And so even the direct comparison approach itself is not as simple as just choosing comparables and making adjustments for the differences. What those adjustments are going to be are critical.
Yeah.
And so the multiple ways to go about it, but the main way we go about it is called pair sales analysis, which is a pretty extensive process of choosing similar comparables, figuring out the differences, and determining the differences in values. Ideally, the theory is you will pick two comparables that are identical in every way except one way, and then which is that factor that you're looking to adjust for. And so the difference in value, assuming both sales are arm's length transactions and receive fair market exposure, should be just the value of that difference.
Right.
So that's the theory behind that. But even after we do all our valuation approaches and we do our cost approach or income approach, assuming they're applicable, we have some other valuation approaches we could take that are less popular, like the development approach. In the case of development properties, we have to get a bit more creative. We have to reconcile all of that. So, and this is a key part where we could even decide to part ways with the direct comparison approach. For instance, part of what we have to reconcile in the reconciliation is whether there's been a recent sale of the property, which we were discussing earlier. If there was a recent sale of the property and it was listed on the market, that is considered strong support for that value of the property.
Right. And so, versus a property that sold 3 years ago.
Correct. Yeah. If the property sold, the subject property sold 3 years ago, then it's still important, more than likely, to disclose it. We're required typically on our residential properties to report at least last 12 months.
Yeah, sure.
Of sale. But a recent sale we'll consider, especially within the exposure period that we're saying that is reasonable, which is also part of what we report on in appraisal report, is we also say within the market value that we're indicating in this report, this opinion of value that we've created, we also are saying as of this effective date, this property should be able to sell at this value on the open market within X to X number of days, which is also part of the research that we do and part of what an investor would benefit from it, the appraisal, assuming that it's a proper appraisal report that's been done well.
So I got to interrupt you there because something just came into my mind. When you give me appraised values, whether it's the value I'm looking for or not, I'm grateful for it because you stopped me from making bad decisions. I've walked away from deals, not even because it wasn't the lift that I wanted, but that value you told me it was worth today was more or less. You're saving me, but I have a feeling there's probably some of the people listening to this show, I guarantee you there's somebody listening to us right now that got pissed off and yelled at an appraiser because the value wasn't what they needed it to be. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, a lot. That's happened probably to every appraiser that hasn't decided, I guess, to go to the dark side and get sued and lose their designation. So, I mean, our obligation as appraisers is to provide an unbiased opinion of value. That's what an appraisal report
totally.
is. It's an unbiased opinion of value. And that being said, it is an opinion. So where at the same time, I have to empathize with some of the listeners that might be yelling at appraisers because oftentimes appraisers tend to be very conservative. But there are appraisers out there, and your mortgage broker and established mortgage broker that you talk to will tell you there's appraisers out there and appraisal firms that drop values arbitrarily. So I gotta say I empathize with that. And at the same time, for the investors, I would say it's important to take your position. You have a very reasonable and an objective position, and what I think is wise.
But think about it this way, because I disagree with you. I'm not empathizing for those idiots at all. If somebody's yelling at an appraiser, they should not be in real estate investing. There are more real estate deals out there than anybody could handle. There's more flips. There's more apartment buildings. There's more real estate that anybody can do. And if they understand this at the level that I do and people I admire do, then my whole idea around real estate investing and property acquisition is using a team of people that can help me make the best decision I can. And there might be a property that I really like personally, and I think it's worth X. And if you're going to come back to me and say it's not worth that, it's worth this, I'm relieved in that because I'm not an expert like you are. I'm not accredited like you are. And if you tell me that that value is worth less, I'm only going to thank you for doing that because you saved me making a mistake. And those real estate people that yell at appraisers because the value wasn't what they wanted it to be are naive. They're not thinking the right way. I think an appraiser is probably the most important person in the acquisition process.
Obviously, I really appreciate your listening of appraisers. I'm very grateful for that. I got to tell you, though, from my experience, and this is part of the reason I started a company to begin with, by the way. I started a company in part because I was looking at in part of the degradation in our profession. So I got to tell you, yes, you're right. A lot of appraisers are very competent, and I would like to think most appraisers are very competent. And I got to tell you that there's been quite a bit of a degradation in our profession.
For those that don't know that word, you're basically saying that the quality of the average appraisers has gone down.
Yeah, I would say so. And there's a particular reason for that. It's called appraisal management companies. So these are companies that have established themselves as the middle person between appraisal firms and lending institutions like RBC, TD, and whatnot. They all have contracts with these appraisal management companies. And the basic idea of it, the principle, it was good to create the separation so the appraiser wouldn't be biased and wouldn't be influenced.
Yeah.
The principle of it is good, but the practice of it, what happened is they started bringing down the fees for monetary reasons to try to make more.
Yeah.
They started bringing down the fees. So we saw appraisers used to charge normally a lot more, like 3 times as much as
Yeah,
they
like
charged them.
$1,500 just to do an as-is appraisal. Now
Exactly.
you can get them done for $700 or $600.
Exactly, but that's not where the appraisers get paid. Through appraisal management company, the average fees are around $200, and that's when I went. That's when we started our company 8 years ago, because I moved away from working with them after 7 months of working with them.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, like, I think last I heard, they were around $175 per appraisal. Now, think about this. An appraiser has to go and drive over to the property and conduct an inspection, book their inspection, conduct also the administrative section of it, then do the inspection itself. Altogether, that might take an hour to an hour and a half, just the inspection together. Let's say an hour, okay? And then they have to come back, input their notes into the report, then do the actual appraisal report.
And do the research to validate
Do the
everything.
research, complete the actual report. And then on that $200, let's say, assuming best case scenario, they don't get 100% of that, because that goes to the appraisal firm. They then need to split that.
Yeah, so they're making $5 an hour.
They're making extremely little. So those were the conditions under which I started as an appraiser. I needed to do about 4 to 6 appraisals a day to make a solid income. So candidate appraisers have been squeezed. And so what appraisal companies have done is, instead of innovating and coming up with better ways to do appraisal work that create efficiency and can match the demand for those fees, which are unfair to begin with,
Yep.
what they did is they morphed into a model of using candidate appraisers. And so junior appraisers coming in, less experienced, trying to do more volume. And so what that's led to is increasingly a degradation of the appraisal work and the standards of the work. They can't afford really to do a really a good quality report. So that's why I was saying, to the point of some of the investors that might be yelling at the podcast, at the camera, I feel for them, because that's in part one of the premises that I used to start my company. I was seeing this. I was part of that, of all of that, and I said, no, this is garbage. So
well, I think like one of the biggest things that people are going to hear anyway is the fact that I pay top dollar for appraisals, and I pay for my own appraisals, even if I'm going to have a mortgage broker order a separate appraisal, because I want to know this information before I waive the conditions.
You get what you pay for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but yes, if you're getting a good appraiser, absolutely. If you're getting a good appraiser, that's not a cheap one, that's trying to get this done for you with a minimal amount of effort involved and giving you a cookie cutting sort of job. And appraisal reports can be quite interesting, quite insightful. They'll give you knowledge on the market, how the market is moving. The neighborhood section will tell you where the average prices are, how the prices are moving. You'll have comprehensive and very interesting reports.
All right, let's talk about these ARV appraisals as I describe them. Probably my favorite part of working with you is I'll put together a detailed budget and plan for the renovations I'm going to increase the value, and then I'll give it to you. You'll prepare this appraisal, and basically you'll tell me if I'm right, because I'm going to do what I think based on my experience, I need to do to the property to get the highest value increase, and you're going to validate that for me. And it's done a couple things. One time was what led me to the decision to buy the property, because you told me that the value wasn't as high as I wanted it to be, but you told me what it was really going to be. So I accepted that. I still bought it anyway. The other thing it could do also, this is something else people don't realize. If you put an appraisal condition in a purchase agreement, 99% of real estate investors believe that if I get you to do an as-is appraisal on the purchase price, and that comes back at that price or around it, I have to waive my conditions, that it's valid. The appraisal condition in a purchase says that the results of the appraisal have to meet my expectations. That's all it says. So I'll get you to do the as complete appraisal or the ARV appraisal. And if that price you give me for that, what it's going to be worth later after my renovations, doesn't fit my overall plan, I'll walk away from the deal. And I can legally walk away from the deal by doing that. And most people don't know that. In fact, if that was just a big aha for you in this show, go into the notes right now and give me a little bit of freaking credit for saving you money. Anyway, let's talk about these as complete appraisals. What's the additional supporting information that you need in order to prepare that type of appraisal for somebody?
Okay, beautiful. I want to start by giving a little bit more context about the as complete, if that's all right.
Yep.
So an as complete appraisal, the first important principle to understand is that it's a hypothetical value as of a specific effective date. So an appraisal always has an effective date associated to it. So we're not saying that this is what the value is going to be of the property once it's finished, then 2 years from now, because we don't know what the market conditions are going to be. It's a current as complete. Mm-hmm. The current means that this is as of today's date, meaning if the proposed development or construction work that you're planning to do was fully finished today, this is what the property would be worth. So it's important to understand that we're not saying that this is what the value is going to be in 2-3 years, because it's possible that market conditions could change. So this is this is part of what you were mentioning earlier. As an investor, part of what you're doing is you're taking on this risk and you're making these bets, right? So that's important to know, especially for new investors to understand. Just because we say as complete doesn't mean it's what's going to be. Okay, so that's the first thing. But now, that being said, an as complete appraisal, if done well, it will give you a very good idea of what this property will be worth today if it was completed. And also, as you move through the construction process, the lender will be willing to lend on that as complete value. So it will be useful for that purpose as well. Again, you're getting two benefits from it. So in terms of what we need for an as complete, as you mentioned earlier, depending on the type of property is going to change the type of information that we need. But constants are going to be construction budget. If you're doing any kind of change to the layout of the property so that the floor plan is going to change, we need to know that. Basically, to help the listeners and the viewers get the idea is, in order to value something that doesn't exist, property that doesn't exist, we need to have sufficient level of description and understanding so that if we were walking through the property and inspecting it, so we could describe it the same manner as if it was actually there. Yep. So we need to know all the types of finishes. If you're going to tear it down, build something new, we need to know what are the materials you're going to use for the roof, what's going to be the exterior, what's going to be the layout, what kind of floors you're going to put in, what kind of counters you're going to have. So renderings are very useful depending on the level of work you're going to do. If you're building a new structure altogether, getting renderings is great. If you're doing a development, well, getting site plan for it, getting the construction budget so we can see everything you're spending money on, a list of finishes. All of that is extremely helpful. But again, the basic idea being we need to be able, in order to appraise it, we need to know exactly what's being built as if we're walking through it. We need to be able to describe it in the report in that manner.
Yeah, totally. All right, friends, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. The biggest thing I want you to get out of this is if you're in real estate investing and if you're using a no money real estate approach where you're raising all the money, you have to mitigate your risk. What that means is you got to do every freaking thing in your power to stop from making mistakes. And if you're not using an appraiser yourself, I'm not saying wait for the mortgage broker to get you one for the financing. I'm saying right up front, call an appraiser, get one on your team, and get them to do 2 appraisals on every property you're buying. If you follow what you've learned in this show, you're going to make yourself a lot more money and you're going to make a lot less mistakes. Is there any last thoughts from you about what you want to share with these guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing that I want to offer the investors is when you're going to request an appraisal, one of the things that would help you more than likely is to prepare yourself for that appraisal, especially if you're not going to go with us. If you're not going to go with an appraisal company that is experienced in working with investors, that has a collaborative approach. So what you want to do is you want to do your own comp investigation. For the most part, the direct comparison approach is what will be the leading valuation approach and what value will be concluded on more than likely, especially if we're talking about residential, smaller residential properties. So what my recommendation would be, do your research, pull comparables, try to look at it objectively and as a reasonable party, and then prepare a package and have that package ready to send to your appraiser. When an appraiser gets a package of comparables, at the very least, a list of comparables where they can tell you're being objective, they know you're not going to be an easy client. Like I said, a lot of appraisers out there are trying to just finish the report and send it out. Yeah. Okay, so you need to be proactive in that appraisal process. Yes, be professional. Don't yell at your appraiser. Don't do any of that. However, it's an unbiased opinion of value. The appraiser is supposed to be objective. We're supposed to be building a case for the value. So if the premises change, the conclusions should be changing. If you notice you're providing good arguments to your appraiser and he's not willing to budge, he's not changing his opinion, he's not being reasonable, and you do have recourse.
Yeah. Exactly. Friends, if you want to get in touch with Eddie, grab his information from the notes below this video, and we'll see you guys on the next No Money Real Estate Podcast.